point.
Okay.
Hey everybody, I'm Elysia Buss, host of Horsepower Empowerment Through Connection, and today I have the honor of getting to spend time with Hallie Sheade, located right outside of St. Worth, Texas, where she partners with horses in equine connection counseling and steps for horses. And she provides just excellent services to the local community. And I'm going to allow her to deep dive into her personal story, her journey into horses, and how she's serving her local community today. Hallie, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. As I said when we were chatting at the very beginning, I think what you're doing is incredible, bringing all of these people together that are doing this work and all the different ways that we're doing this work, and trying to support the field. And I'm honored to be a part of it.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. So let's start with the different populations that you work with.
Sure. So I am a licensed professional counselor. So I provide equine-assisted counseling and psychotherapy. And through my practice, we specialize in working with military veterans and service members, as well as their family members and at-risk youth. But really, we serve others in the community as well who wouldn't fall into those two categories, who have mental health concerns and who have an interest in trying equine-assisted counseling, or who haven't felt satisfied by the results of more traditional off-space approaches, or just didn't feel comfortable going into an office. So mental health being the core, and then from there, those populations, and primarily within all of our clients, we work with PTSD and trauma are big ones, but anxiety, depression, other mood disorders, attention problems, relationship problems. We work with young kids as well, as young as age 3. So we see a lot of child behavior problems as well. So those are our main areas of focus.
That's great. There's so much going on that people are really struggling. Do you see a lot, do you see any people with like domestic violence?
Yeah, we do, especially with the trauma. Most of our clients, some of them are actively in relationships in which they're experiencing that, but a lot of the clients that come to us, they come to us with that we are doing trauma work, come to us with a history of that rather than something that they're actively trying to deal with at the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Why horses? Like, why do you feel like horses work better than just going in for like traditional talk therapy in the office?
So for me personally, my own experience, my own journey with horses has a lot to do with that. So the way the story goes, at least how my parents tell the start of it, is I was about 2 years old and I was in a play group, and we'd gone to some sort of carnival where they had horses or ponies, I guess, on the hot walker. And so if you were going to ride the pony, you had to go by yourself. Your parent couldn't go with you. And so I guess I was the only kid in my play group who was willing to go on the pony, and they have a picture actually going back showing this, so there's evidence of it. But from there, when my parents decided to move to another house a few towns away, when I was about 5, they wanted to make that transition easier. And my mom saw there was a riding stable down the road and thought, oh, well, why don't we try riding lessons? She seemed interested in horses, so let's try that. And they obviously had no idea that would become the best, and probably, at least when I was a lot younger, maybe sometimes crossed their mind, the worst decision they'd ever made. Because from there, I pretty much wanted to spend all of my time at the barn. And it wasn't just the riding. I mean, the riding was a big piece of it. And so, when I was about 9, I remember my parents dropping me off at the barn, and I would groom and tack horses for lessons, do basically whatever my trainer told me to earn a free ride at the end of the day.
Right.
But one of the things I really loved was just being with the horses. And I would have like my horse of the moment, not my personal horse, but like the lesson horse usually of the moment that I was really attached to and interested in. And I would just want to go and sit in his or her stall and brush the horse, talk to them, all of that stuff. And then when I was about 12, there was a horse named Cowman that came in, and I was at a hunter jumper barn. This was a not so polished paint horse. And so he wasn't the best fit in a hunter jumper barn. He was there to be a lesson horse. And there was just something about him that I really, really connected with. And he didn't really get along with the other horses. He was bottom of the totem pole kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he also didn't really get along with the people. He had a mind of his own. He knew what he wanted, and most of the time it was not to be ridden by most people, and he would try to buck them off. He would make their life really difficult. But I remember that first time I rode him, there was something about his canter, and I don't know what it was, but it just felt magical. And occasionally he would give me trouble, but it was more of a half-hearted, oh, this is, trying to entertain himself than actually trying to get me off his back. And we just clicked, and we just bonded. And my dad will tell stories about seeing him. I don't remember this, but he remembers it, where I'd go to leave the stall and Cowman would grab my shirt and pull me back in. My trainer would talk to him about how she, this was not the kind of bond that she'd seen very often in, between a horse and a person. And it just really was amazing to her as well. And so from there, I just became really, really fascinated in the human-animal relationship and the human-animal bond. And so, kind of long story short, I went to college to study animal behavior. And as I was getting ready to graduate, I went to the University of Miami in Florida. It was more focused on primates than it was on like horses. Horses aren't typically the animal that are studied in terms of cognition and all of those things. That's a lot of marine animals. So like, dolphins, whales, and primates, chimpanzees, lower monkeys, that sort of thing. Cool. And I just kind of had this moment of clarity, like, this isn't what I want to do. I want to go back to horses. And I never really left horses. I competed on the equestrian team. I trained horses for the SPCA, but I was like, I want horses in my life, all the time on a daily basis. And so I took a year off. I moved to Atlanta. I became certified as a therapeutic riding instructor, trying to figure out, well, what do I want to do? Right. And I'd always been interested in psychology. I had a bachelor's degree in psychology and biology. And so that's when I learned about blending horses with counseling and psychotherapy. And I was like, oh, this is it. This is exactly what I want to do. And so now I've kind of come full circle in that relationship that I had with horses, especially Cowman. He's definitely the most profound relationship I had with horses growing up, to now try to help create that for people. Yeah. And so really coming full circle in that way. So I've kind of gotten away from your question.
No, it's okay. It's about getting to hear about, the story that people have, what brought them to horses and the obstacles that they overcome. But the question was in regards to why is working with horses mm-hmm. so much more powerful than traditional talk therapy in an office?
Yeah. And so for me, that was a really powerful experience for me, and feeling understood by that horse, feeling safe with that horse. And I think that's what the relationship brings to people as well, that we work with in counseling and psychotherapy. And so, horses, and we also include donkeys in our practice. So I'm going to include donkeys in that.
I love donkeys so much.
So equines,
equine therapy.
Yeah. So like a lot of animals, but, my colleagues are horses and donkeys, so I'll speak to them. They naturally possess what Carl Rogers called the core conditions. And those are the core conditions to support somebody in growing and healing and counseling and psychotherapy. And they naturally possess those. So they're naturally empathic, meaning that they're capable of understanding and really, feeling what somebody is feeling. Now, the way we feel it and the way we interpret it may not be the same to them, but we know that they're capable of recognizing and understanding on some level what somebody is feeling. So they're naturally empathic. They're non-judgmental. So they accept people for who they are. They may not accept their behaviors in a given moment, but they're not judging for somebody for what they're wearing, what they did a year ago, what they did a week ago, the thoughts that go through their head. And right. So for a lot of my clients, they talk about, I just feel like I can just be around the horses and the donkeys. I don't feel like, they're going to judge me. I can just be myself. And that's a really hard hurdle to overcome for a lot of people in forming relationships with people.
Right.
And then, so they're non-judgmental, they're empathic, but they're also really genuine. So, and authentic. They can't lie. They don't usually try to trick you, at least not for malicious purposes. And so then there's that inherent trust there again of, I can let my guard down with this animal, with this being, and know that they're not going to try to hurt me for the sake of hurting me. They're not going to hurt me emotionally. They're not going, they don't have an agenda in mind for me. They don't have something that they're they're not angling for anything. They're just being who they are, and they can't lie. And so I think that's a big part of it is horses and donkeys can naturally give people that experience and put them more at ease and help them feel safer and more accepted. But just even, you know, in addition to that, the idea of coming to work with a horse or a donkey doesn't feel as much like going to therapy as sitting in an office with a person. And so it can feel like a lot of less pressure for our clients. And being outside, it's a more peaceful, serene environment. I've worked out of several different facilities, and at every single one, and they were all very different in terms of, you know, landscaping and the way the facility was set up, but every single one, people would talk about how just getting there felt different, and being there felt like being in another world. And especially once we were out amongst the herd, that it truly felt like being in another world.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. So what kind of models do you use in your work?
So the models that we use are actually models that I've developed. And so I had some training. Most of it is based in counseling best practices that's been adapted to, you know, my experience with horses and my learning about horses, you know, whether that is, you know, through continued riding and lessons or research or just, you know, working with different horse professionals in the industry. I had gone to different trainings and different models. And when I was first starting out about a little bit over 10 years ago, or almost 10 years ago, about 10 years ago, the trainings I was going to, there was a lot of really good stuff in there, but there were just aspects of some of those trainings that I'm like, you know, for me, this just isn't quite an exact fit for my counseling philosophy. And there were certain models that, you know, this is how we do it. And that you do it this way and you're doing our model, you do it, but you know, you do this or this, and you're not doing our model anymore. And so for me, in some of those trainings that I went to, there just wasn't a whole lot of flexibility for me to integrate my counseling philosophy. And so, you know, definitely taking pieces from some of those early trainings. But when I went into my doctoral program in counseling at the University of North Texas, the faculty there had a very humanistic emphasis. And so that humanistic approach of really valuing the relationship and trusting that our clients, and extending this to our horses, have that innate capacity within them to know what they need and to move towards that growth and healing has really influenced and informed our approaches. And so when I was getting ready to do my dissertation, I needed to actually write down what it is that I've been doing and the direction kind of that the people I've been working with had all been kind of like, you know, drifting in the same direction. And so what is it, you know, that I'm doing, and what is it, you know, what is kind of our approach that we're using? And so called it Relational Equine-Partnered Counseling. And it has 4 main influences. We call them philosophical domains. I had a book that was recently published and released by Routledge in August, Equine-Assisted Counseling and Psychotherapy, Healing Through Horses. And I go into pretty great detail about the approach in there. But, you know, you've got 4 main philosophical domains. And so the first one is the relational domain. And so it really pays respect to the importance of the relationship itself, and that being a core and, you know, necessary component in how we do this approach. And so it's based on the idea that, or not even just idea, research, that in counseling and psychotherapy research, again and again, what we find is that the strength of the relationship, and different people use different terms, you know, therapeutic relationship, working relationship, therapeutic alliance. For this purpose, I'm kind of using them interchangeably. But the strength of that relationship between the therapist and the client is the greatest predictor of success. And so I felt that that was really important to emphasize in the work that we do. And so we've expanded that relationship to also include the horses and the donkeys, and to include the equine specialist as well. And so it's really about the idea of recognizing that the relationship that, you know, we have with horses and donkeys is a microcosm of our relationships with everybody else around us, and that everybody that we come in contact with, we have a relationship, whether, you know, that's our spouse, whether that's our boss, or, you know, whether it's the person we're on the phone with who's trying to fix our computer from some distant country. In that moment, we are relating to each other. We are in a relationship. And so just, you know, really acknowledging that as being a huge component. You know, another one of the philosophical domains is that it's experiential. And so understanding that the way being able to actually experience something, it changes the way our brain processes and interprets information, and being able to go through something experientially as opposed to just talking about it. So being able to see the dynamics that are coming up between the client and the horse, talk about them, and, you know, make adjustments, make changes, try new things, as opposed to just talking about those same dynamics happening with people outside of session. You know, the third one is what I've come to call interspecies neurobiology. And so in counseling, there's more and more interest in what we call interpersonal neurobiology. And so it's on understanding what's happening within our bodies, you know, chemically, physiologically, when we relate to and interact with each other. And so really pulling from a lot of that research and a lot of information that's coming out about how mammals interact socially, how people and animals interact socially, and using that information and that knowledge to inform how we conceptualize our clients, the interventions that we might try to do in session with our clients. So there's, you know, a pretty seminal research study that came out, I think it was about 10 years ago, showing that when people pet a dog, our social connection hormone, oxytocin, goes up, and our stress hormones like cortisol go down. And so, you know, pulling what these findings together and looking at how can we utilize this information and what we are learning about the brain, and, you know, both research-wise and theoretically, to inform our practice. And then the final domain is the spiritual domain. And so that really honors and acknowledges, you know, the client, whatever their spiritual beliefs are. It doesn't endorse any particular sense of spirituality, but the way that they relate to the world, the way they interact in the world, and allowing the client to make their own meaning of things. And so, you know, for example, I've had clients that have felt that the horse has spoken to them. And so for me, it's not for me to decide whether or not that quote really happened, because there's no way for me to know. There's too much about the world and the universe that we still don't know. Right. But more so than that, it's kind of my catch-all within that domain to be able to say and acknowledge, like, look, these things are happening. The client's feeling this. The horses and the donkeys are doing this. I've got guesses, but I don't have any science to explain this. So, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. And so that's really where a lot of the spiritual domain picks up, and, you know, pulls to some degree from transpersonal psychology as well. And just kind of having a place to recognize and acknowledge and honor those experiences that happen in session. So that's our relational equine partnered counseling approach. Our other approach, which is basically, we utilize everything from that approach, but it's specifically designed for young kids. So about 3 years old to about 9 or 10, is called equine-partnered play therapy. And so,
sounds fun.
Yeah. You know, with kids that young, what I like to tell parents, at least, is even if a child can talk about what's going on developmentally, that may not be the most effective way for them to talk or to process or express themselves. And so this gives them other options. And so this model is based very strongly in child-centered play therapy, which is an office-based approach to play therapy. It is evidence-based. Our EPPT is not evidence-based because we have not done the research to get it there, but it's based on, or it integrates strongly with child-centered play therapy, which is an evidence-based approach, a non-directive approach to play therapy. You know, the idea being toys are a child's language, or not toys, play is a child's language, toys are their words, and really meeting the child where they are, and just like the other model, allowing for that space for growth and healing to take place.
Nice. That was a very in-depth response. Thank you. That was super cool. I love interviewing so many different people because everybody experiences life and differently, and how they express themselves in their models, and that was really clearly articulated.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And you're one of the few people I think I've interviewed that has created their own model instead of coming from a specific model. And so it's really nice to get to hear that perspective as well, because the channel is really about connecting with people and hearing all the different perspectives and how we've created our programs, and not just aligning with one particular perspective and saying that that's the end all for the way we interact with humans and horses.
Right, because there really isn't. And, you know, people just like, you know, in counseling, when we're training new counselors, it's about finding their theoretical identity. So who they are as a counselor. And so, you know, similarly in this field, there's no one approach that's going to be the exact right fit for every person.
Yes, definitely. I love that too. So I'm a Waldorf teacher as well as trained for public school education. And some people in each of those camps, they're just like, this is the only way. Like, all kids should be educated through Waldorf, or all kids should go to public school, and Waldorf is too woo-woo or whatever. And I'm just like, no, there's somebody like for everything, you know. And I love multiple intelligence theory, and, you know, the attachment theories and the love languages, and everything just like folds in on itself to create the people we are today, and how to meet ourselves. And as practitioners, honoring that there are certain people that we'll be able to meet at a deeper level, just because of who we are and who they are, not just because of like what we learned from school and the model that we have, and having that abundance mindset that says like, yes, I could serve you to a degree, but this person over here could actually do a better job with you. And not letting that devalue us or them. And yeah, it's a really beautiful journey, because I found that a lot of people within the industry, they tend to have that scarcity mindset, right? Because it can be a very difficult industry to have enough clients within. You clearly don't have that problem from the earlier discussions that we had, because you have a wait list, which is pretty amazing. And what would you say, like, the reason is behind you having a wait list?
I mean, part of it, I think right now is there's not as many people, well, not very many at all compared to what the world looked like before, but offering in-person services.
Right.
And for a lot of people, they just, you know, telehealth isn't, no matter how great the therapist is, telehealth isn't going to be able to give them what they're needing. And, you know, we're already so cut off from physical contact with others that being able to come out and have that physical contact with a horse or a donkey is huge. So I think part of it's that. I think part of it is, you know, just there's a huge need and a huge demand for mental health care in general right now. Right. But if I go back before the pandemic, we had a waiting list then too. And so I think a lot of it is just there's a lot of people looking for something different, a different type of approach to mental health care, to counseling and psychotherapy, you know. And not all of our clients, but a lot of our clients are people who have been in lots of therapy before and it hasn't produced the results they were hoping for. And so they're kind of at this point of none of these things have worked. So why don't I try this? Other people, a lot of our clients, especially a lot of our military service members that we work with and some of our adolescents, this is the first time they've agreed to go to counseling. And the reason they agreed to go is they don't have to sit in an office. They're not going to be expected to sit and talk to someone face to face, and it feels safer. So I think just us providing people with that option, and just, you know, I would say my caseload, when I first started my practice in 2014, my caseload was full within about 5 months. And and so it was just really, a lot of it was putting myself out there and going to talk to other providers, you know, whether that was in the military community or whether that was in the mental health community, and just kind of letting people know who I was and, you know, what our services were about and how they could help people. And that wasn't my first foray into doing this work. I'd been doing this work for about 5 years up until I started my own practice. And so I'd really become solid in, you know, my sense of my identity as a counselor and what I could offer people and how it could help people.
That's awesome. There's so much to unpack there. So how many sessions do you do a week on average, would you say now?
Between our counseling services, we do on occasion do groups, but we've actually been so busy with individual sessions since we've opened that we rarely do groups unless it's by request. But we have started a small non-clinical part of our program. It's to help support our clients, you know, through therapeutic riding and other things, either after they've met their goals or if the therapist determines it to be beneficial concurrently. It's a very small part of our program, but all of those combined, I would say we're probably scheduling about 50 sessions a week between me and the other two therapists that we have.
How big is your herd?
The herd that we work with, generally the herd we work with on a daily basis is about 16 horses and donkeys.
Nice. So seeing that many people, like how do you deal with burnout for the equines?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in our approach, in the relational equine-partnered counseling approach, the client works with the herd. And so most of our clients, and this isn't a requirement by any means, but going back to that importance of the relationship and the therapeutic relationship that's been extended to include the animals, most of our clients tend to choose a horse or a donkey, and it becomes their main animal, their main equine co-therapist that they work with every week. And so it's interesting to see that there are some that get more clients than others. There are a handful, but for the most part, they all get a handful of clients because there's something about either who they are as a sentient being, something about the way they look, something that, appeals or draws in different clients. And so that's one really big thing that helps with burnout is that it's not the same horse or donkey that's seeing all the clients.
Right. And they have the opportunity, like the equines have the opportunity to choose if they want to engage that day.
Yeah. So most of our work in the sessions is out in the herd, and most of the time the animals are at liberty, and so they can come, they can go. I had a really impactful session years and years ago where I was at a different facility, and the herd leader at that facility was an older Arabian gelding. So he was very sensitive. He was becoming a little bit more neurotic as he aged, but he was incredibly sensitive. And he had a teenage client that, she adored him. He was her horse. And so but she'd been coming for anxiety, and she'd been getting bullied at school. And one day she came out and she was just so anxious. She almost couldn't speak. And she tried to go to him, and he walked away. She tried again, and he walked away because he couldn't handle that energy. And I think it was the third time, or after the second time, before she could go to him a third time, he walked around to one of the other older geldings, very calm, very laid back kind of guy, and herded that gelding over to the client.
Oh, wow.
And he went and he stood and he stayed with that client, this other older gelding, the rest of the session, because I guess the Arabian, he recognized, like, I can't do this. This is too much energy for me, but I'm going to delegate this to you. At least that's my human interpretation of it. So just really giving them that, really empowering the animals to be able to set those limits, to be able to communicate naturally and organically, it helps them, but it's so powerful for the clients as well. And, it's really interesting because now, having done this work at several different facilities, every one of them has talked about how good it's been for the animals. So, there was, at one of the facilities we were at, there was a donkey that, they basically couldn't do anything with him. They couldn't get a halter on him. They couldn't get him to walk on a halter. I had a client that decided she wanted to work with the donkey. The donkey was gonna be her guy. And, after, I think it wasn't even that long, maybe a couple months, she put a halter on him one day, decided they were going to go for a walk around the back of the property. And the equestrian manager said he and another one of his wranglers looked over and they're like, oh my gosh, is he loose? What is he doing out of the barn? And they saw this teenager leading him, and they just couldn't believe it. And since then, this particular guy tends to get a lot of clients because when we first came back after the pandemic, he'd actually moved we've been at two facilities, now we're at one, and the other facility had allowed us to take him. They didn't really have a need for him anymore, and he came to our new facility, or our other facility. But after the pandemic, he was literally at that gate greeting every single client as they came in for the first week or two, having been completely terrified of people before that. Other horses, the equestrian director had one of his he always had his personal horses work in our program as well, because he thought it was good for them to get the interaction. And there was one that, if she didn't come in, if she didn't get left in after feed, she wasn't going to get ridden that day. You could not catch her in the pasture unless you were a counseling client.
Interesting.
And she, there was a preteen boy one time. He had his horse was a different one until that day. And he was trying to halter his horse, and she kept walking away, and this other horse comes up. She sticks her nose in the halter for him. She's like, let's go. And, you know, after that, her owner started telling me, like, I'm actually like able to catch her on certain days now, and I could never catch her before. And so it just seems like it's really good for the horses and the donkeys too to be involved. So I think that goes a long way with burnout. And then just some of, you know, the more sort of basic things is we take really seriously in terms of, you know, do the horses get and the donkeys get interactions with their friends? Do they have their basic needs met? Are they, you know, are they fed? Do they have water? Because if they're not getting those basic needs met, then they're going to be stressed. If it is a particularly stressful session, then we can see that stress in the horses, we'll go out and debrief with the horses afterward and just, you know, do some calming, you know, massage or grooming and that sort of thing.
Right on. Oh, that's super cool. And then your horses, since they're worked at Liberty, you spoke briefly about therapeutic riding. Do you have much, like, do any cross training for the horses, keeping them in shape, or how do you work with them in that regard?
So the facility that we work out of right now, the horses don't belong to us. They belong to the facility, to the ranch. Yeah. And she's actually decided to split the herd. So her horses that do riding, which again, our riding program is very, very small. So we've only got about 3 or 4 that do riding. Most of them are separated from the counseling herd. And so most of the ones in the counseling herd don't really do riding at all, whether in our program or even in just their day-to-day.
Yeah, they just get to be horses.
They just get to be horses and donkeys.
Nothing wrong with that. So what are some things in your own personal journey that, like, you struggled with to be able to accomplish your dreams?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy field to get into. You know, I think when we were talking at the beginning before we started the recording, there's not really a roadmap to get to this, you know, to do this. And that's really hard for a lot of people. And so for me, a lot of it felt like I was paving my own way. I was very fortunate in that, you know, when I was doing my master's in Georgia, there was one facility about an hour outside the city where I could do my internship. And so I got that supervision and that training. And then when I moved, I specifically came to do my doctorate in Texas because Dr. Cynthia Chandler was at the University of North Texas, and she's a world-renowned expert in animal-assisted therapy. And so I had that support, but it was still really like trying to blaze my own trail and figure out, you know, especially when some of the trainings that I'd been to weren't a perfect fit of that question of, well, this is established. Do I do this anyway? Or do I put myself out there and try to blaze my own trail in terms of how I do this and what my approach is going to look like? And so, you know, again, I was lucky to have supervision, but I didn't have anybody to give me the answers. Right. So to speak. And it's just, you know, it's a risk I think for anybody to start a business, especially for counselors. And this is something I hear from counselors at whether it's master's program, doctoral program. I would imagine probably maybe the case for psychologists and social workers as well, but we don't get training in business management or how to run a practice, any of that stuff. And so that was a huge learning curve for me. And I'm also very fortunate. My dad, even though I'm in Texas and he's in Chicago, has a background. He's a retired attorney, so he doesn't practice law, but he practiced and he was involved in business law. And so he's kind of like my unofficial business manager, you know, helping review potential, you know, legal documents before we send them over to our attorneys of record, you know, helping manage the financials and all that. But that still was and still continues to be a huge learning curve for me because that wasn't stuff I was trained on. Wasn't trained on the marketing aspect of things, the development. And so I think I didn't know what I didn't know. Right. And so that was kind of a shock. And now every day I'm kind of like, I still don't know anything. And so that can feel overwhelming at times. And just, you know, for us, not having our own facility, that brings its own challenges. We've moved facilities a couple times now because what typically happens is we find really great people who are really interested in what we're doing. And we then it's about, you know, figuring out how to coexist, you know, with the need for our services. And, you know, we've been at a therapeutic writing, how to away from this program. And so that's definitely been a challenge, and something that we're working towards for our nonprofit is to be able to get our own facility that, you know, we can really reach the potential of what we can do.
No, that's so cool. Thanks for sharing on that point. And so that brings up the other great point of why you wanted to create your nonprofit in conjunction with your counseling business. Steps with horses.
Yeah. Steps with horses. Yeah. So I started my practice, Equine Connection Counseling, in 2014. And then one of the things that I started really becoming aware of, especially once I had my own practice, was that the people that often needed the counseling the most, especially in our community, which in a lot of cases we have a really big military community here, we have a local base, is that the people who need the services the most often have the hardest time accessing those services. Right. And so we had partnered, as a for-profit, we partnered with nonprofits to write grants, and we'd been pretty successful in getting grant funding for our services, but we wanted to be able to do more. And so my husband and I, my husband is actually a Marine veteran and a therapeutic riding instructor as well.
That's really cool. Thank you for your service.
Yes. We actually met at the facility where I started my practice, training miniature horses for play therapy. So we decided to start a nonprofit in order to be able to raise funds through donations and grants to be able to support the clients that we wanted to work with, we wanted to serve, who were having the hardest time getting services, but who wouldn't have been able to afford to pay out of pocket and maybe didn't qualify for other grants or contracts that we'd had. And so that was a big, the main impetus for starting the nonprofit was to be able to increase access for clients who otherwise may not be able to access these kind of services. And a lot of times that, you know, they're having trouble accessing any kind of mental health services, not just equine-assisted.
Yeah.
And so we are in the process of working to transition all of my practice operations, so all our clients, all our staff, all our contracts, over to the nonprofit. And for our clients, there's not going to be any noticeable difference for them at all once the transition is made, but it'll just, you know, really position us to be able to get that funding and acquire the funding more easily, to be able to support more people, and to be able to support some of our clients who may, you know, a lot of our grants, they cover a limited number of sessions. Right. So we have a grant, you know, it may cover 8 sessions, but when we're working with our veterans, a pretty big chunk of them have trauma, post-traumatic stress. 8 sessions just isn't enough time to be able to work through all of that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And speaking of that, are you also providing virtual sessions for people that when their depression or anxiety is too high to come to the barn, or?
I mean, yes, but generally our clients, you know, they want to be at the barn, especially right now with, you know, lockdowns and restrictions. During the pandemic, we were closed for in-person sessions for about 3 months. And so I would say about half of our clients eventually opted for telehealth. At first, it was just kind of a couple. And then, you know, I was doing just periodic check-ins with all my clients by phone. And then as the weeks went on, there were more and more people like, yeah, I'm really struggling. And they started doing the telehealth. But it was really hard. And it's, you know, it felt strange to talk to somebody who you're used to seeing in person every week.
Sure.
With a horse next to them,
right.
Over telehealth. But it's been helpful for, you know, for example, we have really strict protocols in place. If a client is feeling ill, you know, in terms of when they can come back or if they've been exposed. And so it's nice now to have that option for, you know, if a client, let's say a client comes down with COVID, they're not going to be able to come back probably for 2 weeks. But if they want to have a counseling session, now we have the option of still doing it, even if, you know, they can't be there with us with the horse.
Right. And do you feel like people are still getting positive results from being able to do the virtual work, even if it's a different experience?
I think so. I mean, I think the clients that choose to do it, you know, they're the ones that are going to get the benefits. I think, you know, a client that wouldn't choose to do it and was, you know, felt cajoled or forced into it, then probably not. I had, you know, there were 1 or 2 clients who tried it and they were just like, I'm really struggling, but this is just too weird for me. So I'm gonna wait till I can come back in person.
Yeah, no, and that totally makes sense too, especially with how people process information differently, you know, through multiple intelligence theory, like we were talking about a little bit before. And it doesn't make anybody wrong or bad for, you know, not having something to indicate to them. Do you have any upcoming programs or things that you would like to share with the audience?
We're kind of in a holding pattern right now with the pandemic. We've been getting more and more demand for our trainings. And so we've offered some very small local trainings. Part of what we're trying to do is to be able to offer, you know, full-blown trainings in our models. And so we're in the process of developing, you know, virtual and hybrid virtual in-person offerings, you know, especially just recognizing that the pandemic has continued on longer than anyone hoped and may continue on much longer than we hope or expect it to, and wanting everybody to be safe and feel safe. And so that's something we're in the process of developing, and hoping to launch some of the virtual offerings sooner rather than later, which, you know, with how busy we've been, it's the biggest hurdle is time. It's finding the time to really finalize those offerings and put them together, because there's only one of me. And,
yes, I completely understand how that goes. So you're working on putting together the online coursework right now?
Yeah, we're working on the online coursework and strategies to be able to have, you know, participants gain training opportunities that we'd always envisioned would be in person, but ways that we can try to do that, you know, through homework and consultation, that we can still approximate if somebody doesn't feel comfortable traveling to us, or if we don't have the capacity, you know, to safely host a group right now.
Fair enough. And where can people find you for people that are just listening instead of being able to view anything that I write down later?
Yeah, we have a website, equine-connectioncounseling.com. And so in terms of like professional training and information about my book, that you can find all of that there in the professionals section. Steps with Horses also has its own website, stepswithhorses.org, but that's really more focused on the nonprofit aspects of everything right now, as we're in the process of trying to raise funds to be able to acquire our own facility and all of that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your stories and your knowledge and just everything. I really appreciate having you here today. So one last question for you before we go. So who in the world inspires you?
That's such a hard question, because there's so many. And when I was thinking about this question, my brain was going in so many different directions. So I think, you know, for one, the trailblazers in our industry. And so, you know, Barbara Rector comes to mind, and all the people who started ESMHL with her in the very beginning. I've been fortunate to have some really great mentors at PATH International. I'm an apprentice for the equine specialist in mental health and learning workshop. And so I've gotten to shadow an apprentice under, you know, Marilyn Sokoloff, Memory Stewart, and Alden, and it's just been incredible to learn from them. My UNT professor, Dr. Chandler, who I moved to Texas for, you know, just seeing the work that she's done for the field and the contributions she's made, even in the beginning when she'll talk about it, she's like, everybody thought this was, you know, woo-woo stuff, and nobody was interested and nobody wanted to take it seriously. And just seeing that, you know, that it's been challenging, but that she's just kind of kept going and kept pushing and trying to get animal-assisted therapy legitimized and, you know, recognized by the bigger national organizations. But I think, honestly, when I was thinking about this question, what struck me the most was probably my clients and the horses and donkeys. Like, just seeing the clients put themselves out there and take these risks and, you know, try.
Oh man, I think we've had a loss here, folks. Hopefully she'll come back in a moment.
And the animals being inspiring as well. So do you want me to just kind of, is it going to be really weird for your video if I just pick up there again?
I'll just have to edit it. It's fine.
Okay. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
technology is not my friend. Everybody in my life knows that.
It's all about being like honest too. It's just like, yes, and here we are as humans dealing with technology, and sometimes I like to just not edit things, and I'm just like, yes, and technology happened. So here's us being human with you and showing you that not everything in life needs to be perfect.
That's an important lesson, especially right now.
Yeah. So maybe we'll just leave it in, and it'll just be like, people will be like, wait, what just happened? Stick with us, folks. Next up on. No, the horses and the donkeys inspire you. Is there anyone else other than the horses and donkeys and the clients and that inspire you? That's already been a lot. It's okay.
Yeah, well, I think that all the people that I mentioned, but like I was starting to say before my computer decided it needed a timeout, I guess, is that the clients, I mean, just them coming out and being vulnerable and putting themselves out there and putting their trust in us. I mean, that's hugely inspiring. But then the animals themselves, I mean, the things that I have seen for the way that they relate to our clients, it's incredible. The interest they show in the clients. And I can't tell you how many times I've had a client out there who was feeling vulnerable, who was feeling really overwhelmed, and the herd or part of the herd would just come in and literally surround this client. And, the client would talk about feeling protected and feeling, that the herd cared. And there's, the horse part of me, that's the horse person part of me that's thinking, well, this is how a herd may treat another horse who wasn't doing so well or who they determined to be vulnerable. But what I can't quite explain, as a human, is the fact that they've chosen to recognize this human who is clearly not a horse or a donkey and extend that protectiveness and that care to them as well. And so for me, that's hugely inspiring.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And yeah, Hallie, it's just so beautiful, the work that you do, and that you stand up for your community and pull everyone together and keep such an open heart and mind and sharing your gift with the world. So thank you for that, my friend.
Well, thank you. And thank you for this opportunity to be able to talk with you and share more of our story and what we do.
You're very welcome, my friend. Well, ladies and gentlemen, everybody out there, thank you so much for watching another episode on Horsepower Empowerment Through Connection. Until next time, bye.